Hello there, welcome back. Now, we're still rattling on about the whole kind of the vaccine situation, the COVID response throughout the break. I could fill a whole show just on that topic, but I won't. I will move on because let's talk politics, if you don't mind. There is no escaping, of course, the two main parties in this country, which is great if you like them. It's fantastic if you want Boris Johnson or Keir Starmer as your Prime Minister, but what if you're frustrated, say, I don't know, with the way that the Tories may have handled COVID? Or maybe you won't ever forget Labour trying to overturn Brexit. Maybe you said never again to both of them. And if you did, what are your options? And will any of them really have a chance to get into power with the electoral system as it is? And by the way, 650 MPs. Do we really need that many? And what about the House of Lords with about 800 members, unelected of course? Our second chamber is the second biggest in the world, behind only China, a country which has a population of over 1 billion. Now, COVID, this is my view on this, COVID has kind of thrown everything up in the air, hasn't it? Many people say that life will never be the same again. Well, why don't we take this opportunity then to create some real change? We could look at things like, I don't know, proportional representation. We could look at whether or not we really do need, for example, the House of Lords or all of these MPs. My point in summary is it time to create some real political reform in the UK? William, I suspect I know your answer to this. I'll be very surprised if the answer is no anyway.
Yeah. No, there is. I think we should do the basic thing and ask a few questions, OK? The first question I would ask anyone is, do you think we're well governed? And honestly, if you take a look at how we're governed, I think a lot of people will say it leaves a lot to be desired. Both parties, I'd say both of them are pretty rotten parties. I think they've denied entrance. I think the electoral system denies entrance and challenges to our political system. So we're not well governed, that's the first thing. Second thing on the actual voting system, is it fair? No, it's certainly not fair, because votes cast don't end up with seats got. So there's a very, very poor match. You had UKIP in 2015 got nearly 4 million votes, nothing for it. And that can't last. You can't have a system which basically denies millions of people's votes and doesn't value them the same way as others. And then the final question, do you think, what's the purpose of Parliament? Is it there to broadly represent the views in the country? And I think it is. That's what it's there for. And it doesn't, and it can't. Partly because of the way that the big parties gatekeep their selection processes and things like that. But partly, I mean, the Brexit event proved it. Yeah, think about it. The mainstream majority view was to leave the European Union. How many parties in Parliament had that as their policy? DUP. That's it.
Well, yeah, I was going to say at the time, but, yeah. I mean, it was all changed post-referendum outcome, but at the time, very few. But so what is it that you would advocate then? Proportional representation?
Yeah.
See, and proportional representation, I think, let me just see if I've got, because one of the challenges with proportional representation, there's various different strands or themes to it. It's not kind of a one-size-fits-all, but if we just have a little look at the kind of nuts and bolts of what it is, proportional representation is the idea, as William was just saying there, actually, that the seats in Parliament would basically be proportionate to the votes cast. About PR. I mean, let's be honest here, it would favour you, a smaller party, but a lot of people will say, well, hang on a second, it's going to create coalitions, it's going to create a scenario where we're spending absolutely ages trying to form a government because you've got kind of, like smaller, bitty Parliament, if you like, and some would say, well, it then breaks the link between the constituency and Parliament.
Yeah, well, let's deal with those. So the first one, I think, I'll give you this. I think what we'd lose if you had PR is this sort of cathartic moment where you flush the loo, you get rid of them, you get them out, right? So you lose that. But don't pretend, let's not pretend that the parties that govern us aren't coalitions, right? because they are. You only have to have a look at the Tory party. The Tory party at the moment is trying to navigate its way through winning all these red wall seats. And there are some quite good red wall Tory MPs, actually. But then they've got the sort of Knights of the Shires and the free trade liberals down at the south. The Tory party and the Labour Party are massive coalitions. The only difference is that they've done the coalition and they put it to the people. And in PR, you see what the people want. And then you've got to make it work in the Parliament. So that's the difference. You can have systems, by the way, you can have systems which... I don't like party lists. I hate that idea. I want a system where you have larger constituencies and the link between the member and the locality is kept.
Is strengthened. Jo, what do you think to this? Because the reality of it is, to try and get this... Some people will say, well, hang on a second, we had a referendum, the alternate vote, AV, was it 2011?
Yes, exactly.
And it didn't pass. But I would say it didn't pass because people didn't really understand it.
No, they didn't understand it, and it was the wrong time. To do it. I mean, it was at the beginning of the controversial Liberal Democrat Conservative coalition between Nick Clegg and David Cameron. If you had done it at the end of that Parliament, when people would have been able to say, oh, actually, that coalition worked, you know, the Lib Dems sort of curtailed some of the Tories' extreme views, the Tories curtailed some of the Lib Dems' views, whatever, then I think you'd have got a better thing. The problem is always, I mean, I am absolutely in favour of PR, and it's important to note that we have it, or had it for the European elections, when we were electing European members of Parliament. We have it in Wales and Scotland, and we have it in London for the mayoral elections.
Yeah, we do.
So it's not that difficult. People can get their heads around it. The problem is when you start talking about it, the PR anoraks go, oh, well, you don't want a single transferable vote and you don't want an AV and you don't want...
And it confuses people.
Yeah, and at that point, people switch off. But the basic principle comes down to this, that your vote, my vote, William's vote and James's vote should be of equal value. And they're not in our current first-past-the-post system, because depending on where you live, you know, your vote won't matter if you're trying to overturn a walloping 30,000 majority.
And what's your view, James? I mean, you've got to be honest, I mean, I can understand why people like Jo and William, I'm not being disrespectful to you, but the parties that we're referencing here, they're smaller. You know, the first-past-the-post is really weighted against them, but... You know, if you're like a David Cameron or a Keir Starmer, you're not going to start saying, yeah, let's get some referendum for proportional representation that's going to impact us. So really, whilst it's all great having this conversation, do you really think we'd ever get the opportunity to do anything like that?
If we're strong enough in rebellion, yes, I think we can get it. And I think Jo's quite right. It's a rare moment of unanimity on your panel here, Michelle. That, you know, the people going on about AV this and all the rest of it, you know, it's very boring. And I never looked at it while the Lib Dems favoured it because, you know, I can't get along with them. And I am a little surprised about your remarks about the coalition, but let's pass over that. I think the simple thing is democracy must trump delays in forming a coalition, right? And anyway, we've got enough vacillation, as you hint, already with the existing setup. And I think that what's more relevant, really, is to abolish the House of Lords. I think that's really called for. I mean, I was just looking it up, actually. The Lords Spiritual include 26 archbishops and bishops.
Yeah.
And we've got 30 dukes, we've got 34 marquises, whatever that is, 443 barons being baronial. It's got to go.
Absurd.
Right, so then, because I have to say, it needs serious reform in the House of Lords, in my mind. But you need to have something to almost second check, to mark, if you like, sanity check the House of Commons, the second chamber. You need something. So if you're saying let's get rid of the House of Lords, I'm going to simplify it. Who marks the homework then?
The electorate.
House of Commons.
The electorate.
When?
Whenever they can make their feelings heard, and they will make them.
Every 5 years.
You've still got to have that checks and balances of. You know, scrutiny, and that is what the House of Lords is good for. I mean, I completely agree. In its current form, it's ridiculous. You know, there are people who don't turn up or just pop their head round the door for lunch. You know, it costs an absolute fortune. There are some people who are in the Lords who are there because of their expertise, and those are the people that you want. Absolutely looking at something, you know, a bill on...
But who judges the expertise, Jo? Is that down to you?
But then it goes back to the Commons. I mean, so therefore they're saying to the Commons, you know, this doesn't work, have a rethink. Now, that doesn't seem to be particularly difficult to deal
No,
with.
you can't justify it in principle. I know there are some good laws.
So you don't think there should be a second chamber
No, I
at
don't.
all?
I think you can have a unicameral situation, and it gets a bit technical, but I think the question you've got to address is the English question, because what the statelets in Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland have done is left England dangling without a parliament, without representation. And our policy is to have an English parliament. I'd prefer it in York. If you have that, you can't have two chambers.
In York? Why
Yeah.
randomly York?
Well, you've got to. I mean, we have a north-south problem, so it's got to be in the north. Some people prefer, but it's not.
So you'd move Parliament. So you'd get
An
rid
English
of the
Parliament,
So
an
you'd
English
get rid of the House of Lords.
Yeah.
You'd have essentially the Westminster, if you like, and you'd
Yeah.
stick that in York.
No. You'd have an English Parliament in New York for English matters, so that would be like the Scottish Parliament.
Right.
And then you can't.
And you keep Westminster.
You keep Westminster for UK matters, and it's unicameral. You can have. There are countries that have one Parliament. You can have an enhanced committee system. And remember, Michelle, it would have fewer competences. So you're dealing with foreign policy, the major things that are sort of UK.
Security.
Security. People, but this sounds very complicated, and it is. I think it'll all go at once. I think one thing that people haven't noticed is that people think we live in a two-party system. We don't. We live in a one-party system. The Labour Party has lost Scotland. That's a problem. It's lost the Red Wall. It is not going to get those seats back. And they can't win a national election.
But then what would you say? Parker, one of my viewers, has been in contact saying PR is a no-go. It's present in most European countries, and there they have 2 or 3 general elections every year, which he says is preposterous.
But they point to the worst
not
example.
true.
It's not true.
That's absolutely not true.
Say it's not true, Parker?
It's not true, absolutely. But also, actually, if you need elections, then fine, have elections, because otherwise we're stuck with this, we've got another 3 years. Or 2.5 years.
I'm delighted that we hear the word unicameral on your show.
Are you?
Michelle. I mean,
Well,
that is raising the level.
It's all highbrow debate on
Sounds like
That's
a
right.
type of underwear. doesn't
Completely right.
It is. It's
Or
all-
is it like Omicron?
Oh, well, don't go there.
Well,
I mean, the other thing is that we should have more devolved powers. And I think, we've seen the power of the regional mayors and the voice that they have got. But you also want to devolve even further down so that local authorities, town councils, parish councils, so that people can take more control over their day-to-day lives.
But this is all well and good. How's it going to happen? Do you seriously think Boris Johnson is going to sit there and go, I know what I want, a parliament that better represents the people, so in order for me to do that, I'm going to change the system?
They won't.
he won't.
It'll
But
happen.
this is
It will. I'll make a
Labour
prediction.
thinking.
Labour are coming round to
It'll
PR.
happen. They'll come. Yeah, that's correct. So a very important thing happened at the Labour conference recently. I think 80% of constituency Labour parties voted for PR. They know.
Huge.
They know that the Labour is a big version of the Lib Dems. That's what they are. They're not elected. They can't be elected. They can't win a general election. You can't have a two-party system. The stitch-up can't be supported if only one party can make a government. So I think in the early 30s, you'll have probably some ghastly rainbow coalition, get rid of it, beat the Tories, and then the SDP will be in. And that'll be good.
Sooner.
Wow,
Yeah.
there you go. Steve says we've got no party representing the people at all
Correct.
at this point. I see nothing wrong with the first past the post system, but we have too many MPs, and he agrees that the House of Lords needs scrapping and reforming. He says get some members of the public included in the House of Lords as well. There you go. Get in touch and let me know your thoughts.